So welcome everyone to our brown bag. We are delighted to have you all here, and I'm so excited to introduce Julie Nielsen, who's going to enlighten us on the compliance side of remote work. What a fun topic! Uh, yeah, right. So we're gonna go there. We're gonna go deep. Julie's gonna navigate our way through this. I'm gonna have Julie introduce herself, give us a little bit about her background, and then she'll jump right in. All right, Julie, take it away.
All right. And I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen as I get started, if that's okay. All righty. I can still see everybody. And Shara, can I give you chat monitoring responsibility? Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, and since we have such yes, I'll monitor chat, but if somebody has a question, Julie, like that actually they just want to shout out, when would be a good time to do that?
Go ahead and just ask me. Let's do that. I think since we have a fairly small group, that might be the best. And if it's a long one, I think we should hold. I'll say that. How's that?
Okay, sounds good. So you can just raise your mic.
All right. I like that. I mentioned a minute ago, I'm so thrilled that people showed up because I'm like, oh, Friday morning and compliance. Like, we just hear the word compliance and we think, ugh. But my name is Julie, and I own a very small consulting company called Oyster Organizational Development. And it's not just me. Well, it is just me sharing the content today. However, let me get my screen working here. I incorporated a lot of feedback from someone named Lori Turner at Eisler Dare. So I really want to give them credit as well, and I'll explain why. So I don't want to say too much about myself because I'm not sure that's why anybody's here, but I will say pretty soon we're going to have this nice pretty model on our site, and we're not great at everything in our model. I think I'm past the days where I kind of felt like I had to be great at everything. And what we do the most of is compensation structures and employee engagement with a focus on strategy. So we're really looking at the people aspect of what drives strategy. And Oyster's about 6 years old. So we crossed that line, that 5-year survival route. And we really help companies, mostly in between 50 and a couple hundred, do what we do, be organizationally effective. I'm based in Falls Church, the Tyson's part of Falls Church, but we work all over the country now. We have our first client that's on the western half. I used to say we were the eastern half. And the same is actually true of Eisler Dare. Eisler Dare is based in Tyson's Corner. They're an employment firm. We have almost all of our clients with them. They are a smaller firm. I'm not sure how many attorneys they have now, but they don't have big firm overhead to cart around with them. So they actually are more reasonable price-wise, and we find them to be exceptional. And they can represent people in any state. They just can't, they can't litigate in every state, but they can litigate in the DC area. So that is a helpful thing if you have employees all over the country. So a little disclaimer here in that although we normally, when we speak about employees and employment, we're trying to look at the best in people when it comes to compliance. And some of the things I'm going to talk about today, we are going to talk a little bit about the worst that can happen and what we have to watch for. So just heads up, we want to all, we love our employees, but sometimes people do things that drive us crazy. And that's what today's about a little bit, maybe a lot. So here's what I'd like to hit today. So these are really my objectives for what I'd like us to walk away with. And I'm going to say now, I don't think I'm going to send anything crazy your way, but I'm going to reframe how we look at remote work. And I think that's going to be really helpful. So I want you to walk away with really, what are these potential areas of liability? Because we don't talk a lot about this, right? We talk a lot about remote work. It's our most common question that we get. And typically, well, I'll come back to that. So the second objective, I want to learn from the horror stories of others. And I actually want to learn from those as well. And I find in these workshops that we learn from each other, not just from the person presenting. I want you to hear about 4 scams you must watch for. And I knew about 2 of these, but there's one that may shock you. So get ready. Just get ready. That's all I'm going to say. So I want you to walk away with some strategies and solutions that you can implement immediately. And then if we have time, I want to create the bones of a new, because I think you might want to change things, a new remote work policy that Lori will review. Now she's going to do that. My plan was to do that in a few breakout rooms, but let's see how that goes, how many people are on at the end and what the time frame is like. So when I said that remote work is our most common question, typically it's from CEOs, and it's about the gulf between what employees think and what CEOs want. And I say that employees typically have drunk the Kool-Aid. I think everybody knows what I mean probably by that. And CEOs are trying to figure out how to carefully get them back. About 25% of the workforce went remote, fully remote. I'm going to say, let's kind of pretend right now the data is a little fuzzy, but let's just say 25% are fully back for whatever reason. Either they have to be or they want it to be. And then in the middle is the hybrid group, and the research shows that the typical hybrid is in the office 3 days a week and at home 2 days a week. So we do help companies navigate that. And it is a gulf between employees and the C-level. Very interesting. So I want to give you all a chance to participate here just to kind of get us going. And I think, so I want to ask you 4 questions. So if you could get out your phones, and at the top of your screen, you will see a site to go to. And so if everybody would do this, I would appreciate it, especially since we don't have a huge group. I'm seeing 11 of us total. So go to pollev.com/oysterod394. And our first question is, in which states do you currently have employees? And you can type in an answer, enter, type in an answer, enter, just keep doing that. And so put each state in individually, if you don't mind. So this could be where you're based. It could be where you have formal offices, and it could be where you have employees. So if you'll put everybody in, that would be helpful. And while we're doing this, I'll say I am going to give you 3 guides that Eisler Dare prepared shortly. You're going to get those in the middle. Now, don't everybody disconnect after I give you the guides, okay? I hope you stay on. So no surprise, all of us are DC focused, but we're going to start to see, some others pop up here. I'm seeing New Jersey, Wisconsin, Ohio, Florida, Illinois would be sideways. Give it a couple more minutes. North Carolina.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I use this a lot, by the way, since I'm talking to people who do what I do, right? Poll Everywhere is a wonderful tool for employees as well, if you're not using it. And as you can see, I can do it right in the presentation. That has nothing to do with compliance. There's just a little tip for you. Connecticut. So heavily on the East Coast, and we got Minnesota there in the middle. And I'm going to tell you something about Minnesota in a few minutes. When we do horror stories, I have a horror story, and it involves Minnesota. All right, it looks, whoops, okay, it looks like we're finishing up. So, I guess New York got split up there. So we do have California. I'm so sorry. I hired, well, okay, we're still moving around there a little bit. So I definitely am seeing at least a couple of states on the western half. So we're changing time zones, and we're spreading into states that we don't typically know as much about, just in terms of our own general knowledge. Let me go to the next question here. Oops. Bear with me a second. See if this works. I like it when everything comes together. Okay, the next question. You have to think about this one. Name, if you can, 5 legal requirements related to employment that you should be aware of for every state in which you have employees. So some of you probably have thought a lot about this, and some of you might not have thought that much about it. And what I find, and remember, we don't do just pure HR. We are really on the OD side, but we do pick up a lot of HR questions. And as a result, we do get a lot on this. So we've got SUI. Yep. And I think I can figure out how to scroll here. We'll just watch them go by. Paid sick leave, huge. Workers' comp. Pay transparency, that's another one we're about to hit. EEO stuff, yeah, parental. Final or pay out. So all three of what we're going to really kind of hit today and what the takeaways will be about have come up. Vacation payout. This is a great list. I'm going to give a comprehensive one that might have a few things that we're not hitting here. State mandated. Work hours. This is a tricky one for California, by the way. I'm not going to talk about this actually, but for California, how they track hours and when overtime kicks in is different. All right, let me go to the next one. Activate. You can see it can be a little clunky. What are 3 potential consequences of problems? Fines or penalties? Yeah. I'm going to change the word on the lawsuit ones. Lawsuits over things we didn't know about. Disgruntled employees. Yeah, a lot of the things we do know about. Taxes would be another one that I would put on. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question. This is an easy one and a quick one. Let me activate this one. All right. I believe we are doing everything. That's the key word. Everything right in every state where we have employees. That looks good for the first person who answered. Okay, there we go. I was going to be really sad if everybody said, yep, we strongly agree we're doing everything right. And then I was going to say, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to be that helpful. But I have angst over this, just so you know, personally. All right, so it looks like we're landing on 20% agree. And I'll let you do the math on 11 here. 60, so we're 20, 60, 20. So there's a little bit of not being sure. And as we all know, not being sure can be really risky, expensive, and legally dangerous on anything. So I don't know that we can be 100% safe on anything, but to the extent we can be confident, I think that is really important. I think that's very important. So interesting. So we landed on 20. So somebody feels pretty confident that we've researched everything. We've got most people in the middle there with, gosh, I'm not so sure. And someone saying, oh, I think I could be in trouble for all I know. So we looked at these areas that we were tossing out of potential liability. And I think we hit most of these, but there are business licenses, taxes, they have different taxes, not just SUI and not just the typical things that we see on a payroll register, but they can have unusual things. Unemployment can be different. You know, just getting EINs set up in each state and getting set up to do business is tricky. What I'm finding in my career, by the way, I didn't say this, maybe I should have. I've been doing kind of half HR, half OD for 37 years. I did the math yesterday and I startled myself. It was very startling. And what I have seen is that over the years, it has gotten harder to set up in states, and that many states have moved towards saying you have an office if you have one employee. I've had big multi-state presence and even international presence in the past, and I think it's harder based on my experience. So state disability, as opposed to disability that you pay for under being fully insured or self-insured. Paid family leave can really vary by state. Leave requirements, we're going to talk about that. Other unique state requirements, some strange things. And if they leave the country, then you've got, which happens, then you've got like a whole host of international laws that kick in, not just in that country, but also in the state, right? So if I boil this down, it looks like this in terms of where, and I was talking to Lori about this, where most issues come from. And we hit all of these when everybody was throwing out what might go wrong. It is pay disclosure, sick leave, and vacation. Those are the hot buttons where people run into trouble. And also in some states where the penalties can be really high. They can be really high, like in the thousands per incident, which I thought was very interesting, especially in the pay disclosure category. So I'm going to pick out 3 examples of these, and these are going to be hard. Well, I guess since you're your computer screen, you might be able to see these. These are snips from the handouts I'm going to give you, but I just want to make sure everybody knows how they work. So this first one is on state and local pay disclosure requirements. Note that it's attorney-client privileged, and this is a gift from Eisler Dare to you all and to me, which I thought was very much appreciated. So if you look at this, I picked California and Colorado on purpose because they are, as usual, so different. And you'll see the 3 columns: disclosure of compensation ranges in job advertisements, then other disclosures, and then some interesting notes. And for California, you'll see some additional notes in the blue, kind of beneath their name, right? So, for example, on disclosure, requires employers to include the pay scale in the job postings, and third parties have to do it. Other disclosures, employers have to provide pay scale on an applicant's reasonable request, but notice that they also have to, oh wait, I think that was it on that one. Oh, actually this one, most people's payroll systems accomplish this, but good to know that there's a new law coming that requires employers to maintain job records, wage history for 3 years after termination. So, sometimes we download information and send it off. It can be a little tricky to get it back. Colorado had some interesting things on it as well. But note that California defines an employer with at least 1 employee. It kind of says, all right, well, you just have to post, but if you have 15 or more, then you have to do other things. But what you'll see is most of these say 1 employee or more. So this one's pretty easy to interpret. If you look at the next one, this is where it gets really detailed. And again, you're going to have the actual document, so don't worry if this is a little small for you to read, you'll be able to blow it up. I'm going to lean over here and look because I can see it better. But I picked Arizona on purpose for paid sick leave laws because they've got some pretty interesting stuff. They actually lay out what leave will be and what you will accrue, and they let you go above it, but they don't let you go below it. So they spell it out for if you have 15 plus employees and 1 to 4 employees, and that I believe includes part-time up to some point. Very interesting. There are also concerns about carryover. So payout, so I'll let you read about that. But note, my point here is that it goes down to 1 employee. And so if we have someone say, hey, I've always wanted to live in Denver or in Tucson, right, all of a sudden, there is a big burden on us to do the research. I'll actually say something here. I didn't really have this planned for the presentation, but I asked Lori, so I will tell you what I would do now, because I'm going to share my own horror story. what I would do if setting up a new state, I would actually have an attorney, somebody, do a scan on that state. Yes, we have notebooks and subscriptions that lay out a lot of things, but are they complete? Not necessarily. These things change constantly. And I said to Lori, what would you charge me for that if I do this again, if I hire in another state? And she said, it depends on, we may already have it. It's probably $1,000 if we have it. She says probably $2,000 if we don't have it. And I said, I think that's probably a pretty good investment. So this is the second handout I'm going to give you, and it's all states, and it was updated this year. So you'll be able to share that with your other HR folks in your companies. So the third one and last one is vacation, use it or lose it, and pay out at termination. And I picked, again, California and Colorado. And what's interesting is, although some states are going to say you can't have use it or lose it, and that's getting more common, what you can do is cap your accrual to limit the liability. So if you look at California, it says prohibited. We can't force you to lose it. This is both at the end of the year and upon termination. So you can't make people lose it, but you can cap it and you can limit the accrual so people stop accruing at a certain point. And California is that one employee state. So if you look at the next column, you've got vacation payout upon termination. California says if you owe vacation, it is wages, it's payable, and it's due. And so does Colorado. So looking at our leave policies is really essential on a state-by-state basis. Somebody asked me last week, do we have to have this massive policy that covers every state? And to me, you all might not agree with this, but what I think is best is to have a leave policy and then have an addendum for each state, for the whole policy manual for each state that we're in. So this is our handbook, but oh, by the way, each state, your state may vary. Go look at your state. That, to me, that's the easiest way to do it. So I want to ask you all for some horror stories because I think it's helpful, but I want to kick us off with two. I asked Lori what her best one was, and it's actually her favorite. She said that one of their clients had an employee move to Puerto Rico. And there were two problems. One is if you have employees in Puerto Rico, you actually have to give them a Christmas bonus and a turkey. So who would have thought that you would get in the business of buying turkeys for employees? But it got better. That employee actually sued for age discrimination. And I think there was something else involved as well. The company won, because you're probably wondering about that. The company won, but they were able to get it thrown out primarily because of the unauthorized move. And that actually is a key point for us to talk about today, is that unauthorized move. So does somebody violate a policy to go? Because that is where our greatest risk is. We're probably in pretty good shape if we know somebody is going. But what's happening right now, remember I promised you one shocking example, and that's coming. But what's happening is employers frequently don't know when people move. I hear this all the time. You may have seen it. It's happening a lot. So my example is I intentionally hired somebody. I only have 3 employees. I told you we're relatively small. And I hired somebody in Minnesota. I use a wonderful site that you may want to use or consider. It's called the Mom Project, and it's a great place to find heavy part-time, light part-time, all different types of people. I love it. So I found a wonderful employee, and she is in Minnesota. And we worked hard. I told one of my folks handles payroll, and I said, okay, research Minnesota, find everything you can. I did not ask Lori, just so you know. And so she did. We found that it would be difficult to get set up, but it was doable. And the first part of what I learned was it was just hard. We're little. I have very few resources. It took a ton of work, many hours for somebody on my team to get set up. This is not a low cost effort in any state. And so when people ask to move, and hopefully they are asking, we need to remember that. So there's the time cost as well as the actual setup costs. So we found that Minnesota is one of those states where you get threatened a lot. So immediately, although we couldn't pay them, they don't want you to pay until you're set up. But the first notice I got threatened me with jail time. I'm like, that's really scary when you're small. I hate that, right? So we get it all taken care of. Fast forward, this was last year. Fast forward to this past weekend, I happened to be having lunch with a client. We're sort of each other's client. It's a CPA firm. And I mentioned my employee in Minnesota, and now I am an LLC. Some of you may work for LLCs, but you probably don't. But if you do, pay attention, because he said, "You're in Minnesota? You didn't tell me that." One of his employees handles our account. He said, "You have to pay personal income tax in Minnesota." I had no idea for last year, which, as we know, has closed. So LLCs and big companies can still be LLCs, by the way. So if you happen to have an LLC or be working at one, make note of that. It is not just Minnesota. So the owner of or owners of the company could have liability way beyond the employment side. He said, "This comes up a lot. You should have told me." I said, "Oh no, this is terrible." So anyway, now let me turn it over to you all. I suspect you have, they might not be horror stories, but some interesting stories about things that have gone wrong. And I feel like we all need to know these so we can learn from them. So here's your turn. Who's got some? Sharon, you may have heard some from your whole network, I'm guessing.
They don't talk about horror stories. They block them out.
We're supposed to pretend everything's always perfect, right?
Man.
Does anybody have any? I was hoping people would have something better than the turkey.
I'm happy to chime in. I forgot to actually add it to the list, but we have somebody in Massachusetts.
Oh.
Massachusetts has paid state leave, paid sick leave, which is fine, except in Massachusetts. Well, we had a number of issues with Massachusetts, but in Massachusetts, it's a shared cost. So like in DC, you just pay your tax, as an employer, you pay the tax and it's over. In Massachusetts, there's an employee portion of the tax and an employer portion of the tax. And it also differs depending on the size of the employer.
Mm.
And it was extremely difficult to set up. I don't know what the issue was, but it was really, we ended up having to do an amended W-2 because it wasn't being taken out properly. And at that point I was like, we'll pay the whole amount and whatever it is. And I just need this amended W-2 so this poor man can file his taxes. But the other thing with Massachusetts is, unlike DC, where you can make somebody whole or they're allowed to use their PTO to supplement and things like that, in Massachusetts, if an employee uses the paid sick leave, they are not allowed to supplement. So they're only allowed to use the paid sick leave. I was like, that's a horrible benefit.
Yeah.
So it's like the little things like that you just don't know until you get into the state.
What I hear when I hear these challenges like that is there's almost an opportunity cost as well, right? Because we've got somebody, either we are doing it or somebody else is doing it, spending a ton of time on research and correction. And correction can be very time consuming. Employees think, well, what's the big deal? I'm just moving. And they don't realize there's a lot behind it. That was a good one. What's another one?
You want Domino's? No, Papa John. Okay.
I'll take Papa John's. Any other good examples? They don't have to be crazy, but just any examples of where things haven't gone right.
We've also had issues closing states. So you hire somebody in another state, they're no longer with the organization, and then you try to close the state, and that takes a ton of time.
I've had people say they got notices for years after closing a state, like 3 years, saying you haven't submitted your report. We're going to come get you, you know, that because they're always threatening. Yeah, that's a
But
good point.
why
I
would
hadn't
you
thought of
want to
that.
do that, Samantha, in case someone else would go to that state at some point in time, or?
Because you don't want to keep having to file
Okay.
reports for not having anybody, and the chance of me hiring somebody in Kentucky is pretty low. I guess if it was a state where I thought, I mean, we're trying to actually retract from the state, so we're actually looking to no longer hire people out of state if possible.
Okay.
I think we're going to see more of that. And let's talk a little bit more about that when we get to strategies and solutions. I believe, I hope I'm going to add a couple of tools to your toolbox along that front. But yeah, there is an organizational cost to this, and it is bigger than people think. And especially if you try to put some sort of valuation on the risk. And remember, everything can change. Not just in January at the beginning of the year, but some states might make a change effective in March or June or July or whatever. So we've really got it to stay on that. So somebody's got to be watching it, either internally or externally, which I think is a good takeaway. So I think this is a good lead in. What I wanted to talk about next is some scams. And I always obviously I value employees like you do, but what I want to focus on here is the bad employee. And you may have been reading about this or seeing this online, but there are some scams going around, and the new one just about knocked me out of my chair. It's the second one there. But let's talk about double jobs first. So these are 4 things that are happening. And I'm actually going to say that 3 and 4, only one of those is a scam, and I'll explain it. So double jobs, this is happening. This is common. I have one client, and we are pretty certain that it has happened twice. I've been involved with 2 terminations with them. Obviously, we do a little bit of HR, and 2 terminations, and we were pretty certain that in each case, these people had 2 jobs, and that's why they weren't performing well. And if you picture being fully remote at 2 companies, it's easy to do. How would you know? How would you know? Picture, if you will, the people who can do it best. Do you know who it might be? Who could have 2 jobs remotely under the radar the easiest?
IT people?
Yes, that is exactly it. Picture, I'm an IT expert, and I have company X to my right and company Y to my left, and I'm a help desk, and I'm good at my job. And you know what? They actually could do this pretty easily. And maybe management doesn't have it necessarily a good sense of my, the requirements of my job. They think I'm working hard. This happens all the time, right? And I'm working hard, but maybe I am not fully utilized. Maybe I'm not fully utilized. And they just work 2 jobs and they make it happen. And apparently some of them can do it very easily. And then some, like these 2 at one of our clients, failed. By the way, both of them were accountants, just so you know. More intensive. It'd be harder to hide. And it probably crumbles. But I think IT is the best example of who can do that.
So much
Okay.
for their integrity of especially in that function. A little
Well,
ironic.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I could picture someone saying, what's the problem? I do a good job. I do a good job of both. I'm available. I get it all done. What's the problem? I could picture someone saying that, right? So I think there are 2 pieces. There's, clearly we need to watch for things like this, and we'll talk about kind of how we could do that. But there's also this utilization understanding. And I've always felt like from an HR standpoint, that it was HR that had the best understanding of how utilized people are that managers don't tend to have a good sense of that. I just felt like I knew people well enough. So I don't really have any data to back that up. But managers tended to be more like, oh no, that person, she's busy, he's busy. No, we're good. Okay, the second one I did not know about. I gave it the name farming just because I couldn't think of a better term. This is on the increase. Somebody, let's just call him Joe. We hired Joe in Texas to do a job, any job. And Joe hires somebody in another country who's very capable, because they're very capable people in other countries, to do Joe's job. And that's Joe's feet there in the, with the beer in the picture. Then Joe, it gets better. Joe says, well, that was easy. I'll go get another job because there is still a labor shortage in big areas. So Joe goes and gets another job. And Joe says, I'm just going to go find person number 2 in another country. And 3 and 4 and 5. Joe can very easily be 5 people and pay very little for people to be him and be that person with the feet at the beach and the beer. I did not know about this one. And when you hear about it, you think, oh, give me a break. How often can that be happening? Right? Like for real, Julie. So this one actually came from Lori, and Lori said, get ready. It is happening. It is happening and they are seeing it. So, okay. Who's shocked or not shocked?
So the
Sharon?
company is not even doing a virtual video interview. They're just hiring the person and they have no idea what these other people look like.
They hired Joe.
Okay, so
So
then
Joe
when
interviews.
it's time to have a meeting and Joe ends up being Mary,
Joe can meet, but maybe Joe's not doing the work. So
okay,
Joe shows up when he needs to.
got it.
Isn't that interesting?
How
And by the way,
long can you get away with that for? Though, like, I have a really hard time. Like, I don't know about you. Like, I think it depends on the job, because I know at least at our organization, there are so many meetings and so many things people are involved in.
yeah,
That if you're not, it would be hard to imagine that you could do this for 2 or 3 jobs and get away with it. Like the double jobbing thing, 100%. I have now experienced that. So I get that. But the farming out, like, so Joe, tell me about X and Y project. How, like, what does
Yeah.
Joe say if he's not doing the work? Like, that's where I struggle.
Joe has to be a good manager, right? Of his time and his people who are being him. And I would assume that it's more common doing it with 1 or 2 people. I bet this started with 1 and it worked. And then some enterprising person says, I'm going to go hire 2 people. So I have 2 incomes and I don't have to share too much of it because they're international.
Or it's a very task-oriented type of job where they're, very specific things, spreadsheets, or, something that a person is creating that then is handed off versus, if it's a more strategic job or it's,
Yeah.
creative or I don't know.
Yeah, I think
With
the more,
Samantha, I don't know how, it's, or you're a really, really good liar, right? And then at what point does it all, what point does it all, come crashing down?
It seems possible, and it also seems like it definitely depends on the type of job, and they have to be a great project manager and stay on top of each task, project, and whatever their hired employee is actually doing. So they're just managing, but making the money.
I think you just summarized it perfectly. They're managing the way anybody else manages. They're keeping the money. And this has to be for jobs where people aren't showing up that much for meetings.
Yeah.
But those jobs are out there in some cases. Sharon, were you going to say?
It's almost like they're treating themselves like a consulting firm. Think
Yes.
about it, right?
They
But
are.
Julie, look, you've got employees, right? And you're PM, I presume, PMing the project. You have other people doing the work, but everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
But that's how the person's running it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If Joe could use these skills for good, not evil, he might be promoted within his own company if he has such an entrepreneurial, innovative approach. And Julie, you might be getting to this, but around a year ago, there was a buzz about companies being able to track online time for employees.
Yes.
And that was pushed down. That was really pushed down because of the, not trusting nature. And I was in that group too. It didn't seem right to me, but you hear these examples with Joe and his beer and it makes you rethink that.
I agree with you. And it did get pushed down. And I want to talk about trust and verification in a few minutes. But if you flip around that requirement to have they put software on a lot of computers, and it's been around for a while too, that would track productivity. But then there were stories about people coming up with ways to move the mouse to make it look like they were productive. And there were videos. There's a ton of this on video, by the way. You can just Google it. But there were videos of people like being at the gym and like having their mouse, like you could have like a iPad. There were all sorts of crazy ways around it. And people were doing it. So yeah, there's this balance, right? We have to have a healthy balance of trusting and then being smart. And there are people in this world, there are employees out there. And I'll give you a really good example in a little bit of kind of a funny, crazy one, but there are people out there who will blow it for everybody else and who will cost a lot of money. So before I move on to the next two, I will say I had an example, probably 10 years ago, maybe even further back, of somebody who figured out, so we were hiring not a consulting company, but like a professional services firm to process a whole bunch of surveys. And an employee said, I could just create that agency that has a bunch of people to do a whole bunch of data entry. It was before they were all getting scanned or entered live, right? And that's what he did. He literally set up his own little entity. He pretended he was the company, used the company's name, and hired people. He recruited at a local community college, and they were good. He did a nice job at it. And it was about 6 people. So all 6 people thought they were working for the company that I worked for. And it all fell apart when one of them stole a box of surveys and the police were involved. I mean, blah, blah. It got pretty crazy. Actually, it started when the police weren't involved. He said it was stolen from his car and he didn't file a police report. And so when I asked about the police report, that's when it all fell down. So people are creative, right? He was kind of smart, I suppose. Not necessarily ethical, but he was smart. And he said, well, why don't I just create my own little agency and keep the markup? Why should I give it to an agency? And that's exactly what he was doing. There are probably a lot of these things that don't get caught. But I think as we value people and want to trust people and care for people, I think we need to keep that one piece of our one hat on that says, I need to be wise and know that there are people who will take advantage of us if they can. Okay. So the third one, I think we've all heard of. Oh yeah. Yeah, sure.
It makes me wonder if HR people need to start getting into the business of training on business ethics to their employees.
Isn't that interesting? What a great question. Yeah, we have to learn about it in school.
Why not?
But we don't talk about it so much. We talk about it a lot at government contractors, right? But at other organizations, not that much.
We don't think about it, but people have different view of what it means to be ethical, or even if even ethics should come into the situation. So ethics policy, right? But then training on and then having this kind of discussion of saying this is
Yeah.
what it looks like in practicality and having an actual open discussion around it.
Yes.
With your people's thoughts and feelings.
Does anybody do training like that already?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think it would be part of, kind of an overall compliance or, your code of conduct, or could maybe even be part of, what you might do, harassment or civility in the workplace, that sort of thing.
Is anybody hitting this type of thing though? This type of any behaviors related to remote work that you're still an employee, even if you're 3,000 miles away? Interesting question too. Like, yeah, because you're right. We're already doing the training. So how do we incorporate this kind of thing?
It's different. It's beyond the harassment and all sort of the normals, but we're in a new remote virtual situation.
Yeah.
Are there ethical situations that need to be brought to their attention? Because if it's not, they could just, say, well, if they didn't tell me I couldn't, then I can.
Right.
Yeah, but I think as organizations, we also have to be careful about overtraining and like being stewards of people's time. And it's really like, I don't know about other people, but I get so much pushback from staff about asking for more and more of their time for different types of training, even when it's beneficial to them, that I think you do need to, doing it at orientation and making sure it's in your handbook and you talk about it is important. Like we always talk about whistleblower, right? At least I do. So I think it's hard to say like we're going to do another training just on this. Like we do IT security training already, and I know a lot of the company that does the IT security training. Now that I think about it, I'm fairly certain they have an ethics component to it as well. So like, I don't know. Like I almost feel like, do I really have to teach you how to be an adult and how to be a good human?
Here's the thought. Is it management training? Is that where you tuck it? So, hopefully we're doing good management training, although that is a big challenge for a lot of companies, right? A lot of, I won't ask you all, but I know it's been hard for me in the past. It is probably where I was weakest. It was the most important, but it was always where I was weakest. And a lot of people say that. So if we can do good management training, it's good for a lot of reasons, but this could be a good management topic because they might be the ones to see it first. Especially remember my point about utilization. So it's something we on the HR side that we don't talk about that much, and really understanding who's overutilized, who's underutilized, and how do we know? How do we look at that?
I just think that conversations need to be part of the everyday. How does it relate back to each of the specific jobs? What are those consequences? We're bringing this into this conversation because for this new project, or how it relates to our business or our product or services. And I think that's, so to Samantha's point, you don't need to just kind of have training for training's sake, but how do you, it's just part of that every day. And then it becomes a behavior that hopefully you can see, or you then can fix or talk about or whatever.
Yeah, and I really have to give a +1 to Julie's notion that, there's definitely a strong management training component to this, because if somebody's not showing up for meetings, if somebody isn't available when you expect them to be available, if they're not producing, according to deadlines and all, that's a manager's job to be on top of that.
Yeah.
And, if they're able to, essentially draw a paycheck without doing anything, I'm not sure that that's the employee's fault.
I think you're right. If somebody's not catching it, like who are all the guilty parties, right? There might not just be one guilty party.
The managers are busy. I currently have an employee that I am assuming, and it's only an assumption, but I can just tell from the behavioral portion of it, she's not working from 2 to 5. And her manager doesn't necessarily know, but I know, and I know that she's unknowingly snitched on herself just by, telling me certain things that are going on in her life. But she's Ubering from 2 to 5, picking up and dropping off and doing things like that. And I'm like, that's why you're not responding.
Yeah. This does relate to our conversation today, right? Are people doing, it's not necessarily fully on it's policy compliance. It's not necessarily government or regulation compliance, but that's huge. That is huge. Yeah. Is the manager observing? And if I had to pick the biggest problem that comes up with remote work, it is that. It is, and people do sort of accidentally snitch on themselves, right? They're out there at the grocery at 2. They're picking up kids and we want to be family focused, right? But I talk a lot about blend, that, hey, that's okay if you've got to go pick a kid up at 3 or 4, but you don't still stop at 5.
Right. It's about
blend.
flexibility, and we offer that. All you have to do is be transparent, but she's not. And she's picking up in DC. She lives in Maryland, so she has to drive about 35 minutes, and then she has to wait for her husband to get off at 5. They have one vehicle, so she's not working.
Yeah. That is definitely something to handle. And you know, the words I like to use a lot are give and take, especially with exempt employees, but even with non-exempt as well. But what's the give and take? And the give and take is a gift of the ability to work at home. But I'd like to talk more about this and like, okay, so what do we do about, and we can include people like that as well, not just on the compliance side, if you would like. Because I do think that is the biggest problem. So it'll be interesting in a few years to see reports on American productivity, because we know we're taking hits, but you don't see a lot of it summarized in numbers right now. Everybody just kind of knows we're taking some hits. So it'll be interesting to see what those numbers look like when they finally.
Julie,
Yes.
it'll be interesting to see Gallup in a couple years. You know, this gives all new meaning to actively disengaged, really.
Yes.
I'm still trying to recover from the guy at the gym who's moving his mouse. I mean, that's really, you know, earth-shattering. But, you know, actively disengaged, how is that going to be traced, and what will the numbers show compared to time before?
Yeah.
But
And I wonder too about
but I disagree. I think, and at least for my organization, maybe it's just specific to us. I think the fact that we treat people like adults, we expect them to get their work done. So obviously, if you're not getting your work done, there are going to be consequences to it. But I think giving people the flexibility and allowing these hybrid schedules has really gotten people more engaged, because they can do their work, they can enjoy the work that they do, they can really appreciate the organization that they work for, and still be able to have the flexibility of their life. So I actually think that, at least for a lot of people, you're seeing increased productivity. No. Are we going to see it in the manufacturing? No, obviously that doesn't work in those environments. But for, you know, the traditional white collar desk worker, I think the ability to, you know, pick your kids up from school and come back and then work after dinner is really, really valuable. And it actually engages more women in the workplace.
I think you're right.
And I think you're seeing something, I'm going to call it hyper engaged, right? For those who are actually just naturally engaged employees, they're actually overproductive and stressed out because they can't turn off, right? There is no more.
It is a problem.
And they're working till 10 o'clock at night. And I think you've got extremes on both sides. For people, I think, who are naturally disengaged, and I don't just mean in their jobs, but maybe just as workers. Or some people are just not as engaged in their work, and some people who are really engaged. And I think the virtual is balancing it out, but it's also causing people to be more extreme on both ends. That's my anecdotal.
There are a lot of people who can't turn off, and many employees want to come back to the office for that reason, at least several days a week. And many want to come back every day. They're like, get me out of my house. Yeah. I need the structure. I need the people. I need something. Let me mention 2 things here. One is, as someone who deals with lots of different organizations, I would propose that there's not consistency within the organization. So everybody's not hyper engaged. Everybody's not actively disengaged, but they're pockets. And I suspect these people, this increase, these trends are in the pockets, right? You could have a fabulous workforce overall that's highly engaged, but is it 100%? Probably not. We're going to have people who, look at this woman who's going to pick up her kids, driving from Maryland to DC. She's stuck probably, but being stuck, ideally we want to help her. We want to help her figure it out, but she's got to understand that, okay, giving back the give means you're not done at 5. Let's talk about it, figure it out. But there are a lot of people like your, was that Tiffany, like your example?
Yes.
I think there are a lot, and they're doing the best they can, but maybe we need to help them. And it could be education in, okay, you're not just working from 9 to 5. And oh, by the way, the 9 to 5 includes the kid pickup. Maybe you're 9 to 7 and the kid pickup's in there.
But then managers need to know that, well, they want consistent leadership and management, and that, how I'm going to interact with one employee is going to be different, and that's okay as long as I'm consistent and there's no favoritism or discrimination and all of that. But that's an element of understanding the nuances, and it's the employee, the remote employee, recognizes, that they have to, what am I trying to say? They have to kind of be, obviously let the manager know what they need and what they want. And if there's something that the manager is allowing them to do, then they've got to show something for it. They've got to continue to be proactive. So if I need to be away from 2 to 3:30 every day, that yes, I then will work in the evening, or I'm going to be meeting all my goals.
Right. Do you think that remote work actually requires better management skills?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think so too. Like, we have to be better. Managers have to be better, more on it, not less on it. And remember, middle managers are always, if you look at the group that's the least engaged, it's middle managers. You see high engagement with senior leaders, pretty high engagement with employees frequently, but in the middle, it sinks. And so we really need to build up that group with skills and confidence. I'll stick a note out here. This is really compliance related, but I think it's very important. One of the biggest mistakes I see of hybrid workplaces is organizations saying, well, okay, we're going to be in the office 3 days a week, because that research shows that is the norm. You all pick them. And then what happens is, then it can vary based on the size of the organization. Somebody comes in on a Monday and they're like, why am I here? I'm the only one here. I'm wasting my time. I could be doing so much more if I were at home. Why am I sitting at the office? And they are right. So to the extent organizations think about what days we will be in the office together, no employee choosing, or little employee choosing. Maybe they get to choose 1 and 2 of them are set or something like that. But why do we have people in the office? Do we do training? Do we do meetings? Is it days we do? What happens on those days when we're in the office? It's we want to connect. Is there a meal? Is there coffee? It doesn't have to be expensive. But so if you are letting employees choose, maybe think about that. What are we doing when we're there? So there's a little non-compliance tip. Okay, 2 more scams. I think one of these you know about. So quiet quitting is a fairly common term, and typically it's meant in an informal sense. Number 3, meaning I'm just less engaged. I'm working less and less. I do enough to get my paycheck, but I'm not. So I might be satisfied because I can do as little as possible and get my check, right? This is why we don't measure employee satisfaction anymore. But am I engaged? Like, do I have their hearts and minds? I'm just doing as little as possible. It's all about the check. And they've really kind of left, but they forgot to tell anybody. They resigned, but they forgot to tell anybody. As opposed to number 4, which is formal. Okay, this is kind of just as bad as number 1 and 2, is doing as little as possible and making a big deal about it. I meant to mention this earlier, but remember, a lot of this is on the internet. So people at white collar companies, this is not like working at Wendy's. At white collar companies will post on these things. And and give like a, it's like a, ongoing story of, I only worked for 2 hours today and nobody figured it out. Double jobs on the internet, farming on the internet, although it doesn't really have a name yet. Maybe I just named it. Quiet quitting. By the way, you've probably seen public resignations where people video their resignation and do something kind of smart or terrible. Smart meaning not in a bad way. So do people make a big deal about doing as little as possible? Don't think these things aren't happening. We always want to think that would never happen at my organization. And I've seen these things, extreme things happen at big organizations and small. The example I gave of double jobs, 20 employees. They knew each other really well. They trusted each other. It was like family. They only had 20 people. How could you not be like family? And it still happened. So these things are happening. They aren't as, they're shocking, especially the farming one. That was my shocking one. But they are actually happening. So when we think about someone, Tiffany, like the example you gave, I don't know that she's quitting, but she's somewhere between part-time and full-time.
He's brand new.
Really?
Yes, that's another challenge.
Yeah, interesting. All right, we
Can I
might be able
throw
to.
out-
No.
Can I throw out one thought though, around this idea of what's been called quiet quitting? I've also heard it called working to the rule, or doing no more than my job demands of me. And I think we have to be careful that if I don't necessarily think that it's right that everybody should be required to do more than their job is requiring them to do. Sure, if you're ambitious and you want to get ahead, that's a good way of doing it. But I don't think it's necessarily bad that somebody does the job that we're paying them to do, but doesn't want to do any more than that, because that's what we're paying them to do. So I think we have to be careful. Maybe it's language, maybe, and if we're underpaying somebody or overpaying somebody for the job, that's something we as the employer need to look at. But I don't know how much I want to put on the employee to expect them to do more than what I'm paying them to do.
Bob, you took the words out of my mouth. It's, I think there's been a lot of hoopla over this quiet quitting, and I think it's been overblown, because I think it was really more about boundary setting, especially during COVID, where people were so overtaxed and they were so worried and people were overworking. And so when they started working less, it all of a sudden became quiet quitting. So yes, I think, the people who are doing 2 jobs or aren't working for half the day, that's a different story, but that's not quiet quitting. That's just being a bad employee.
Yeah,
We should call it that. But this is what my job is. This is what you pay me to do. I shouldn't have to do 10 other things on top of that all without you promoting me or paying me more money. Sounds fair to me.
There is a concept that comes up in compensation, actually, which of course we do a lot of. And you can call it, I guess it's a question too, which is other duties as assigned, right? Is every duty in the job description? And the answer is no. We actually encourage people to limit them in job descriptions to increase the flexibility, right? Because some employees might say, well, I do 200 things. And somebody might say, well, here are the top 4 I do. And we actually recommend the top 4 and be broad and show that flexibility. And I don't think everybody's going to agree with what I'm about to say, but I think in general, if you take Tiffany's new employee, typically that employee should be much more efficient and effective after 12 months and able to take on more, right? So an employee is different after a year and probably again after 2 years and can do more, and we want to accomplish that. So to the extent we watch for this buttonhole of your job, this is all you do. Nice to see you. We're glad to have you. This is all you do, right? their time is going to be condensing. It should be for any typical adult worker. And so then we get into this, what is my job? Just to do what's in my job description? Or is it to do all of the other help with, contribute to all of the things that come up? And my job description is broadly written. We lean towards that latter. Job descriptions are broader, and we want to compensate you all for that. And we look at exempt, non-exempt. Obviously, those are different. And non-exempt person can't give as much. They might want to give more and maybe they can't. But yeah, we need to recognize that I'm not sure what to call it, but the gap that gets created as people naturally learn and get more efficient and use technology better. That's in almost every job. Therefore, we should be adding to the job as people get more skilled.
But there's a fine line there
It's
though,
tricky.
too, isn't there?
Yeah.
That, we don't take it, that we as employees don't take advantage of that and just keep piling on, but not recognizing that in our compensation and titling schemes.
It's good planning, right? We need to be good planners and we need to understand what it takes to do a job. And we need to understand the give and take. And so the spikes and the peaks and the valleys, I think are important. Any other thoughts on that? Because this is important, right? We're getting into some nitty gritty. We're kind of stepping away a little bit from compliance, but it's critical.
I think that's job proficiency. It's not about, it's, a job description. This is what somebody's job is. This is what we expect them to do. I actually hate the other duties as assigned. I try not to have them in my job descriptions.
You're not alone.
Because I think it's a horrible catch-all. And I don't think it legally holds a whole lot of muster anyhow.
Yeah.
If you get into a lawsuit situation. So, but I think, I don't expect somebody to be proficient in their job for 6 to 12 months. But once they're, proficient in that job, then are they getting promoted? Are they getting, if you're giving them an annual increase, that allows for them to take on more. But I think I agree with Bob. If you're just adding, it's now you're just taking advantage of somebody.
And let me just say, I think the line is, did either somebody does more, like you said, 6 to 12 months. I agree with you on that. But then what do we do with that efficiency? Do they become a part-time person? And Tiffany, your example maybe is that, well, she's new. She's probably not there. Or how do we approach that? So maybe
I don't think somebody's doing their full job description for the first 6 to 12 months.
Perhaps.
I doubt, in fact, I would doubt it. I think it's almost impossible.
I think it depends on the job, right? So,
right.
But in general terms, I would agree.
Yeah. It's a good concept to look at, right? I don't know that we can solve it here, but it should be on our radar, our corporate radar. And those first 12 months are really important, So let's look at some. I'm going to go ahead and switch to keep us rolling, but I think these are important conversations to have. And so I broke strategies and solutions into 2 categories. I said the high level, and this might seem really obvious, but I think it's really important. And then more the foundational on the next slide. And I put trust, verify, and know in advance. So trust, it's a common word. We all know what it means, right? But we need to look at how we trust and how we determine that. So for example, a really easy one, I like to think that we should give applicants the hairy eyeball, right? Like, do not trust an applicant, right? If we all have incredible stories, we should have incredible stories because we should be finding people who should not work for us as well as those who should, right? So to the extent we can give applicants the hairy eyeball so that when they come on board, we can trust them, that is a great thing. That is a good thing. So are we verifying that people are who they say they are? I mean, some of this is just good old-fashioned HR, right? But are there other ways? So can we just talk about trust for a second? Like, are there any thoughts on trust and how we develop that? Because it's kind of hard for somebody to walk in the door with that, especially if they're virtual. And trust does get to this compliance issue. Any thoughts?
Well, with my example for this new employee, she's 30 days in and we're not trusting her at this point.
Mm.
She interviewed very well. Her references checked out, but from what I'm seeing, the performance, the behavior, some of her duties, she's just not leveling up to what she had promised in the interview.
Tiffany, are you addressing her already?
Not yet. We're coming up with a way to do so with our mid-year check-ins, which are coming up in May.
Got it.
We're trying to figure out how to best approach the situation because her manager doesn't know all of what is going on, so we have to tread carefully.
Gotcha.
Why doesn't her manager know? Like that's the more concerning point in the whole story.
If you know.
Well, this just started a lot of it just started coming out about 2 weeks ago because she's only 30 days in. And so the CEO knows a little bit now because I've sent her a few emails regarding it, but I haven't given her the full story, as well as I just got back from a 1.5-week vacation. So it's today actually. So she will know. And then we're going to figure out the appropriate approach with me giving her the information and then her handling the situation.
Got it. Got it.
Because the manager is the CEO. She's very, very, very busy. And I've been training her to do administrative and office management things. So I've been working with her the most over the last 2 to 3 weeks, especially because we just had a board meeting. So that's one of her roles. And I've been engaged with her with expense reporting and board meeting only.
Oh, now that all makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. I think if you have anything to do with taxes, which is everybody who has payroll under them, make a mental note too. Once we hit day 30, we're eating their unemployment costs if somebody isn't going to work out. So mental note, to the extent we can determine if a new employee is good in those first 30 days before day 30, that is a good thing. So can you think of some ways? I have a couple of ideas for you, but can you think of some ways that we verify that people are who, not just, I don't mean identity, but think about verification. What are some things we're doing right now to verify?
If you're talking about the work itself, is it actually something specific, right, that they're giving you? Is it a document? Is it a spreadsheet? Is it a are you getting feedback from a client or a colleague, or or you're just, the manager's just having this conversation and they're asking the right questions, right? To help them to say, okay, and then did I communicate correctly? Was there a goal? Was there deadlines? It's a two-way street. There's responsibility on both sides. And then you ask these questions, you get a sense of, okay, they've done the work. And then is that either in an implicit or an explicit verification?
Lisa, you just nailed it on the work side. Perfect. And then we need to add in, so pulling back to compliance and the state side, do we add in something like in our policy for remote work? Do we say that maybe quarterly you have to submit? I mean, some people might not like this because you might say, oh, it gets to trust, but do you have to submit a utility bill or something that shows you are still living where you live? Some people might not like that. But that kind of verification for remote work is important. Another big trend is just people moving and just not telling work, and not necessarily intentionally. Right? Like, oh, years
ago, I worked for a big company, and part of the business group that I supported, was a call center. And we were, this was just in the forefront of doing remote work. And so, we had this whole pilot project, et cetera. And one of the things that we had to do when we were setting it up was we had a management person or someone on the project actually had to go to the house, right? And make sure, because we were giving them, you know, in those days, expensive technology and equipment and all of this. And we had to make sure that they weren't just sitting in their dining room, that they had a separate place, that if they had small children, that someone was taking care of the child and they weren't, you know, the primary caregiver during the workday. And then it was set up that, you know, whether it was monthly or quarterly, that someone actually came to the house and did a check.
I wasn't going to mention this because I was trying to stick mostly to the compliance side, but there is a lot of FaceTiming of your office area. And it is not a bad thing to make sure people do have daycare, right? Remote work is not daycare. And so some components of that are still at play. So my thinking around this is because we know there is really high risk, even if there's an unauthorized move to another state. This is the biggest risk, you not knowing it. Because back to, if we know it, we're probably going to be pretty good. It's if we don't know it that we have high risk, and that is where the trend is. Oop, I forgot to tell you, I moved to Mississippi 3 months ago. Oops. Well, 3 months is a long time, and tax withholding, unemployment, state disability, like all these things. And who knows where I moved to. I might have moved to an easy state. I might have moved to a hard state. So think about adding to your remote policies. We're not going to have enough time to do some writing today, but think about adding to the policies and think about the verification component, not just to catch people who might do something intentional, but people who might forget. And I actually think there's been a lot of forgetting. Like people went, oh, I didn't even know I needed to tell you. Like, hello, did you not think about the fact that you pay state taxes in Virginia, and now you're living in New Jersey where it's a lot, or Delaware. Where it's
Wasn't there was a thread on the listserv about like 4 or 6 weeks ago that someone had this employee, she moved to Mexico or she moved to another country, and
there's a lot of Mexico.
Didn't they? I think she ended up, or did she she terminated the employee, right? I think, which was the right thing to do after all of that. Yeah. So some of you were shaking your head. You remember that.
Yeah. I'll add a little bit of a twist because we had this happen pre-pandemic, where an employee that was already remote moved to California, told her manager, who said, oh, you have no problem. And the manager never told HR.
Oh.
And then 3 months later, HR finds out because she submits a tax form for California. And it's like, oh no.
Right. Yeah. And you're in California.
So you got to train your managers too.
And here, I think this is really important when it comes to that third bullet, knowing in advance what your rules are. It is totally okay with the eyeball on compliance to say, here are the states where we will employ. So it is okay to say we will be DMV. It is, I told you my Minnesota problem, which is now another headache for me personally. I had to hire I had somebody retire, and I hired another person, same source, mom project, and she ended up in Vienna, Virginia. I'm so excited. Like from now on, I think I will hire local, and I'm small, so it's probably more important for me. But we can say, here are the states where we will work, period. And thereby we're saying, here are the states where we will not work. You know, if you can avoid it, you do not want an employee in California. It is hard. And there are many other states that are in that category. So we could pick a region. We can pick a time zone. Time zone could kind of make sense. That was something else that was helpful to me from a customer engagement, customer service standpoint. Although if you end up having a lot of customers in another time zone, then you might want to have employees in that time zone. That could make sense. So know in advance what they are. And the reason I think that's really important is what's happening right now is a lot of organizations are being reactive instead of proactive. So I would encourage you to be proactive. You could even do, well, I was going to say you could do the research in advance, but just know you're going to do that research maybe within this region or within this time zone, we're going to be willing to set up shop in those states, but we're sorry, we're not going to set up in just any state you're interested in going to. And then we have to mean it. Meaning if a wonderful employee says, I really, really want to go live in Colorado, and that's not one of ours, are we ready to say no? And that could actually be a good thing. So when we send you these documents, the 3 documents from Eisler Dare, you will see some penalty information in those, and it is substantial. It is substantial. So,
Also, Julie, I'm sorry. And then also how to communicate the no in a way that still, maintains employee trust, employee branding, and all of that, because I know things from the candidate side, from my coaching clients, right? All the people, the job seekers, they're being so unfair, or worse yet, inequitable, or right. And how could they? And what's the problem with me doing X, Y, and Z? And then I might counter, I was saying, do you understand the administrative burden on the HR side? Yeah, but that shouldn't matter, right? Like, so you've got these 2 sides. So how do you communicate that in a way that is respectful, but also maintains, your business needs, right? So that the employee feels taken care of still, but also that you have your boundaries.
Yeah.
And
Sure. I'll add.
Sure, the funny part on that is that, nobody ever cares about HR's admin burden, because when we say that, they're like, oh, don't say that. And it's like, I'm sorry, but, we're only so large and we can only do so much.
Right. Like, what's the big deal, right?
What's the big deal?
Who cares?
Yeah.
There's another nuance here that's really tricky, and this comes up a lot in compensation. Another key question for us, and this is actually very hard for us, is how do we compensate? So you move from Northern Virginia to Mississippi, much lower cost of living. What does that mean? Do we lower your pay? Do we keep it the same but not give you increases? Do we pay the same all around the country? Right? There are all of these different nuances. It is really complicated. And then you put the compliance layer on top of, we've got to share the ranges. Well, are we sharing, right? It gets really complicated. Our work has become much more complicated because of the multi-state. So that's kind of a whole other layer. I know our time is declining here, so let me just show these, just some thoughts. So the lowdown for me is the foundation. So what does our policy look like? So is it a policy and we have some state addendums, perhaps, or do we just call out every single state? Every time we add a state, do we add it to the policy? Could be. And the training question that we talked about. And it's interesting because I actually didn't think about the fact that it's really management training until we were in this workshop. So that was just kind of an aha for me while we were talking this morning or today. It's not morning, is it? So I think management training probably is the way to go. And don't forget the softer sides of that, the utilization part of it, as well as the remote part of it and the compliance part of it. And then I think, I always think our communication should have a cadence. What's our drumbeat of communication, of all different types of organizational communication? But this can be a component of that cadence. We're talking to remote people. So what message are we giving this week or this month that relates to remote, right? And then in the worst case, if it does happen, how do we make it like it never happened? It involves multiple locations where an employee was, where they should have been, or where we thought they were. And then, of course, there are employment repercussions. Did someone violate the policy willfully, or was it a management goof, an employee goof? What happened? But the making it like it never happened is very difficult. Let me share one more thing. And I actually had wanted to leave more time for questions, but we've had some good discussion during the program. So I asked Lori for what she was seeing, trends that I might not see coming yet. And she had 2. These were not on my radar. And she said reasonable accommodation requests for people at home. Big increase. And employers are calling saying, what do we do about this? And where she kind of laughed. And what she said is where organizations are landing is saying, we'll accommodate you, but in the office. not at home. And she said fake doctor's notes are off the charts, both from a remote work perspective and in the office as well. So she said, just, be careful. I had a great story along these lines. I don't have time to share it with you, but again, as we're talking, as we were looking at earlier in my presentation, these things are happening. So we have to realize that we love our employees, we trust our employees, we value our employees, but they can pull us into this compliance area when we weren't prepared for it. And they can do things that they weren't supposed to do. And there is a percentage of the population that will. I think we've probably all seen that. So we want to manage to the big chunk of the population, but know that little chunk is back there that could cause trouble. The other thing I'll mention before we wrap, so we won't be able to do our policy drafting, but I had a feeling that would be the case. I would much rather talk about these things the way we have. But to the extent we monitor social media, we can catch a lot of these things too, because there are videos, there's a lot of talk. And I'm not saying monitor on a daily basis, but you can monitor. You can pay for a service that will do a check on new hires to look for things that are suspect in their online postings. And that's not a bad service. Did they do this at another employer? So that's not a bad thing to add into the pre-hire process. A lot of organizations don't know about that. So that's one suggestion. And then another suggestion would be, I believe, this would have saved me money, actually. I believe it's worth having an attorney. I've introduced you kind of in this presentation to Lori as an option, but any attorney, any employment attorney, to do a scan on each state you open up in. I think it's worth the money. It's probably a few hours, right? 2, 3, 4 hours at the max. I think it's probably worth it to do that. So that would be my approach now. And it is actually what I have been recommending to clients. So I hope I was helpful. I hope I didn't scare you too badly. I'm glad we got to talk about these things as we went through.
Thank you, Julie. Did you say that you had an attachment or a handout for folks?
Yes. And let me see if I can attach them in the chat. It depends on how you have.
You should be able to. And either way, if you just want to, because I actually would like to send it to the entire Brown Bag group. So if you just want to email it to me, I'll send it out to the group.
Let's do that. I'll email it to you. Yeah, you do have it freed up, so I could have attached it, but I'll email it to you, Shara, and then you can share them. I think you'll find them really helpful. It's all states. Isler Dare did a really nice job. And I hope the big takeaway is being proactive, and thinking about the policy, thinking about verification, and thinking about getting ahead of these compliance issues.
Hey, by the way, Julie, I know we've just wrapped up, but I just had one quick question on your last slide. You mentioned reasonable accommodations, right? For those organizations who actually are fully remote, there is no more office. You cannot come back in. My presumption is you need to provide reasonable accommodations, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
You're talking about for those who actually have an office where people could go into, but they're choosing not to.
Exactly. Yeah. So her thing was, so Lori's point was that it's getting a lot more common to say I'm working at home, but now I need to even work less at home than I'm already doing. So she says like a major trend.
Interesting. All right. So first of all, thank you, Julie. Round of applause.
You are welcome. I hope I was helpful.
Thank you. This is great. This is absolutely great. We appreciate you, Julie. And I know we've just run out of time. However, before we let you go, this is the second of our sort of new trend of doing these virtual brown bags, or I should say a resurrection of them. So while I have you all as a focus group, are there any topics that you'd like to have us talk about in the future? I'm happy to go and recruit a speaker. I'm sure Sharon would be happy to recruit from her network as well. Any speakers, any topics that you'd like to hear about, or any ideas that you have for doing this on a regular basis? Would anybody be interested in having a periodic roundtable on employee relations issues, on engagement issues, on problematic employees, almost like an HR therapy kind of a thing, where we have kind of an open discussion around let me tell you, a safe space, but this is what's going on with me. And then we have an open dialogue. Anything, would that be interesting to people?
I think employee engagement would be good.
Yeah.
You know, I could use some fresh ideas these days.
Yeah.
I don't
Sort
know
of
if
an open,
others
open
agree.
forum, open dialogue kind of thing, not a presentation, just, hey, let's share stories, best practices, that kind of thing. That work?
Problematic employees and advice, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Dealing with problem employees. Great. I'm happy to work on that. Set
Or
that
the
up.
difficult conversations
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah.
elements. Is it that somewhat of a linkage, but not
Yeah.
always. But
Yep. Great. All right. Well, I'll noodle over that and actually have an idea already for that. Actually, for those of you who know my husband, Eliyahu Lotzar, he's kind of has a specialty, and that's part of his specialty is that area. So
Problem employees.
problem employees, all that stuff. Yep. Yep. He actually comes from a social work background, so he brings that into his OD work. So yeah.
And Shira, I was just going to add in there, I was just waiting for it. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'll include the deck as well when
Thank
I
you.
send you these documents.
Yeah, I'll send it to everybody. Fantastic. And I've got the recording, so I'll send that out to the group as well. All right. Thank you,
Thank
Julie.
you.
Thank you,
Have a
everyone.
great weekend.
Next time. Have a blessed day.
You're welcome, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.